maybe the world will always be crazy and creative work will always be hard. And then the question becomes, how do you keep going?
Whoa. The red light. The red light's blinking. So, the Creative Nonfiction Podcast is sponsored by Goucher College's Master of Fine Arts in Nonfiction. The Goucher MFA is a 2-year, low-residency program. Online classes let you learn from anywhere, while on-campus residencies allow you to hone your craft with accomplished mentors who have Pulitzer Prizes and best-selling books to their names. The program boasts a nationwide network of students, faculty, and alumni, which has published 140 books and counting. You'll get opportunities to meet literary agents and learn the ins and outs of the publishing journey. Visit goucher.edu/nonfiction to start your journey now. Take your writing to the next level and go from hopeful to published in Goucher's MFA in Nonfiction. That all sounds good, right? Hit it. Right. Yes. Oh, yeah. Wow. So Austin Kleon is on the show this week. Oh, boy. If you're listening to this in the Pacific Northwest, specifically the Portland area, Austin will be at Powell's on April 11th. I'm going. At least I better be going. Oh, well, are you here for the first time? In this digital safe space? Yeah? How are you? I'm sort of hungry right now. Well, this is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I speak to badass writers, filmmakers, producers, and podcasters about the art and craft of telling true stories. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, all the usual places. Please subscribe, and most certainly head over to BrendanO'Mara.com, for show notes and to sign up for my monthly newsletter. Once a month, no spam. Can't beat that. I went to AWP last week, the Writer Industrial Complex, and was up in Portland, and met lots of people, IRL, in real life, that have been on the show. Allison Williams, Donna Tallarico, Jeff Geiger, Jean Guerrero, Rebecca Fish-Ewan, Lee Gutkind, Hattie Fletcher. Sorry, Hattie. Had a significant amount of beer with Donna and her husband Kevin one night. Played some board games at a board game bar. I got lost at one point. I was walking the wrong direction in Portland for about 30 minutes before I realized I was heading north instead of south. About 2 a.m. Got my 10,000 steps, though. Hey, the Creative Nonfiction Podcast is also sponsored by Bay Path University's MFA in Creative Nonfiction. Discover your story. Bay Path University, founded in New England in 1897, is the first and only university to offer a no-residency, fully accredited MFA focusing exclusively on creative nonfiction. Attend full or part-time from anywhere in the world. In the Bay Path MFA, you'll find small online classes and a dynamic, supportive community. You'll master the techniques of good writing from acclaimed authors and editors, learn about publishing and teaching through professional internships, and complete a master's thesis that will form the foundation for your memoir or collection of personal essays. Special elective courses include contemporary women's studies, travel and food writing, family histories, spiritual writing, and an optional week-long summer residency in Ireland, with guest writers including Andre Dubus III, Anne Hood, Mia Gallagher, and others. Start dates in late August, February. Start dates in late August, January, and May. Find out more at baypath.edu/MFA. So yes, Austin Kleon is here. He's a writer who draws, man, and the author of Newspaper Blackout, Steal Like an Artist, Show Your Work, the Steal Like an Artist Journal, and his latest, Keep Going, 10 Ways to Stay Creative in Good Times and Bad. And it is badass, as they say. We talked about his time in libraries, researching in public, how his books talk to each other, and so much more. He's a machine, man. Head over to austinkleon.com for tour dates. Subscribe to his newsletter. It's the best in the biz. Follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Austin Kleon, and listen to him right here, right now. Like right now. Go.
My time in the library is becoming even more meaningful and more significant as time goes on. Like, I've really started realizing how much that shaped me right from the get-go, and it makes me wonder how, like, the randomness of your first kind of real job, how that, like, sets you off on a path later. Like, I'm kind of interested in that now, because so much of what I learned at the reference desk I use now in my own work. And it's sort of like, it's stuff that you would expect, like when you're a reference librarian, you learn how to, Google really quickly, and you learn how to research and find information really efficiently and quickly. But then there's also stuff like, I learned a lot about just what it was like to be a reader at the library, how many people come to books for different things, and how many different kinds of readers there are. And I think that working in a library gave me a real sense of what books circulate and what books don't, and how, being popular isn't necessarily good, and and being good is not necessarily popular. And I think it was a good exercise in learning how kind of ephemeral the whole publishing process really is in some ways, but then how long lasting it can be too. Like, one thing librarians aren't supposed to talk about a lot is the process of weeding that goes on. And what weeding is when you go through the collection at the library and you decide which books stay and which books go. And that was a real humbling experience. Like, the first time I had to, like, see what a favorite novel of mine, like how many times it had or hadn't gone out, versus like a tattered Danielle Steele novel.
Right.
And that was just like a really good education as a young writer. It was the best job I could have hoped for.
And I think that underscores a key point, that if you have talent either as an illustrator or a painter or a writer, fill in the blank, it almost doesn't matter how good you are unless you're willing to make the kind of work that people want to consume on some level.
Being a librarian taught me a lot about genre, and it taught me, like, one of the things, like, the cliched wisdom is you can never judge a book by its cover. That's the exact opposite of what you learn as a librarian, is that you can very quickly actually judge a book by its cover. Like, you can find out exactly what genre it's in, or where it should be shelved, or, that kind of thing. You learn so much about publishing, and what books are. And I think it's true that, you can be a very talented person, but if you don't find a good place to kind of insert your talent, you just don't get the breaks and the audience that you might necessarily have otherwise. And, if you had told me that I would have been shelved in self-help when I was 20, I think I probably would have laughed at you, or,
Right.
but it's been interesting how self-help and the illustrated gift book were these genres that I didn't really know existed, but once I found them, they became these formats in which I could kind of create the kind of weird illustrated books that I really loved and wanted to do. And so I feel like one of the gifts of my career right now is that I'm working in a very commercial genre, and that allows me to be really weird with format and the actual structure of the books. And so I find that to be a really fun place to be, where you can write books that people actually read, but allow you to be as weird as you kind of want to.
There's a great punk rock DIY ethos to your books too. They feel they're easily consumable, but they're extremely actionable in a lot of ways too. You know, I'm always running a colored pencil under so many of these passages, and then citing the quotes that you cite and everything. And where does that DIY ethos for you come from?
First of all, I'm really happy that you picked up on that, because I have always felt like, for me, the books were fancy zines.
Yeah.
I really wanted them to be fancy zines. I wanted them to feel like something that was almost like photocopied at a Kinko's in the middle of the night. I want them to kind of I want them to be like polished fancy zines, basically, to have that kind of immediacy and to feel like they were made from the same hand. Like, I think that's something that is really important to me, is that, even though I have a great editor and a great book designer who I work with, I really kind of get to have my hands on every page of these books, and I'm kind of deeply involved in the design process. So like that's like super important to me. And the DIY element just came from, I'm a big punk rock fan. I think I've internalized a lot of the lessons of that kind of DIY ethos, and I'm a guy who I'm happy about running a one-man show, kind of, I like to keep, I want to have my fingers in whatever has my name on it, so these books are like, I really do think of them as just fancy zines. Like, I feel like that were assembled at some really, really fancy Kinko's in the middle of the night.
Yeah, in your first two books, they seem to come out of a place of hope in a lot of ways, and I feel like Keep Going seems to come out of more of a place of desperation, given sort of a current climate where everything just feels like it's under attack. And I wonder if that kind of rings true with you at all.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Steal Like an Artist and Show Your Work were they were like my sons. They were kind of born in optimistic time. It's funny because my son Owen is about as old as Steal Like an Artist, and my son Jules is just a little bit younger than Show Your Work. But they were, those books were written in optimistic times, and they were really optimistic about the internet and the internet's potential to kind of launch yourself into the kind of collective consciousness of the world, or whatever you want to say, the internet's ability to gain an audience. And I think Keep Going comes from a more, I would hope it was a more mature point, but Keep Going is a book that came out of kind of two things happening at once for me. Like, one, I was watching all my artist and creative type friends kind of lose their minds over the kind of political climate, and also just the onslaught of social media and the way like we've all just kind of become phone junkies. But then also this feeling that, I'd been doing this for over a decade now, and my creative work didn't really seem to get any easier.
Right.
Like, every book is still a struggle, and every project still feels like starting over with a blank page. So everything sort of got better for me once I realized, like, hey, maybe things won't get better. Maybe the world will always be crazy and creative work will always be hard. And then the question becomes, how do you keep going? And so this was a book I really needed to read for myself. Like, I really wanted this book to exist for me. And so I put together over the past couple of years, this book that's supposed to be a pep talk that kind of, when you're bottomed out or burned out or starting over or whatever, Keep Going is supposed to be a corrective, a kind of pep talk that gives you back to like where you need to be.
And to your point of the world being crazy, you write in the new book about even going back to Thoreau's day, the weekly newspaper was almost too much for him to absorb.
Yes, I was reading a lot of Thoreau while I wrote this book, and I was reading his journals, which I don't think, I think most people, if they know Thoreau, they've had to read like Civil Disobedience or Walden in school. And the thing I really love about Thoreau's journals is it's really his kind of raw experience on the page, and he even wrote in his journal about how he wished he could just hand his journal to people because he felt like that was the real, like, true expression of himself. But I'm really fascinated by Thoreau because I think he gets this really bad rap as like a fuddy-duddy, and I read Thoreau and it's like, he's kind of overeducated. He like lives with his parents. He is really upset about the government. He really loves plants. He really sounds like a millennial to me. Like, he sounds like a lot of my friends. And I found him when I was reading this book to be so, I could relate to him so much. But, Thoreau is in this like really tumultuous, he's living through this super tumultuous time in the country. He's writing in the 1850s and things like the Fugitive Slave Act have passed and the country is really starting to come to a head. And he actually never, made it to the Civil War, but he was living through this time of deep turmoil, and he was battling with the question of like, how do I as a writer, how do I stay engaged with the politics and the climate of my country, but also reclaim enough of my time to have the freedom and the headspace to do what I need to do. And he did. He was subscribed to a weekly newspaper, and he decided that was just too much news for him, that it was taking him away too much from his everyday life. But yeah, Thoreau was kind of a guardian spirit with this book for sure.
And I shouldn't say what I said. Your first two books, like I know you've Newspaper Blackout was your very first one, and the Steel Journal kind of bridged show your work in the latest one. But I kind of I said the first two books because I in a lot of ways I feel like Steal Like an Artist and Show Your Work and Then Keep Going are like really a trilogy of sorts. And I wonder if do you see that Keep Going is kind of like your Return of the Jedi and the third movie in this franchise of yours?
I hope it's more like my Last Crusade. I feel like Steel is my Raiders of the Lost Ark. I feel like Show Your Work is sort of, some people feel like it's more of a Temple of Doom book, because I feel like some people read. I really love Show Your Work, and I think it was hell for me to write, but I feel like it turned out the way I wanted it to. But some people read Steal Like an Artist and it feels so fun and freeing, and then they read Show Your Work and they're like, wait, you mean I have to do work now? Like, so sometimes I think for some people Show Your Work is their Temple of Doom, but I wanted Keep Going to really be my Last Crusade in a sense, in that like it both echoed the first book and the book after, but it also kind of stood on its own and was a kind of ride into the sunset feeling at the end of it. And so I did think of them as a trilogy, and I was trying to find trilogies that that I could kind of model off of, but it's hard. It's hard finding good trilogies, actually. But especially my mind sort of tends to go towards movies. So I was like, oh, Indiana Jones, or like, Lord of the Rings or something. But I wanted this book to kind of stand on its own, but also definitely be part of the series. And weirdly enough, I think that this book, if you don't know my work, is actually the easiest entry point, because I think there's something about this book that makes it a little bit more accessible to all types of different people, like whether they're creative or not.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. You can go any direction you want with them, which is kind of fun. And you can always, if you're in that kind of, say, self-promotional rut, you could be like, oh, Show Your Work, that's how it reminds you how to do that. Or if you're kind of stuck in terms of maybe just in a creative rut, maybe Steal Like an Artist might give you that shot in the arm to be like, oh yeah, that's right, I can go find more influence and steal that influence to start making a better whole. And then of course Keep Going is just kind of that an engine thrust to give you that requisite push that you might need to kind of, put all those pieces together and maybe make something new.
I like that. I like that way of putting it for sure. I do think they talk to each other though, and I definitely kind of saw them as my little box set. So I and they have the same format and everything. So I feel happy. I've actually, I think this is the first book that I've really felt on every page like, okay, we really did what we set out to do on this. Like this really, because when Steal Like an Artist came out, I worked so quickly on it, and it was so fast, and it was so just kind of blurted out of me that I really didn't think about it that much when I was doing it, and then it was kind of this like surprise success. And Show Your Work was a book written under real duress. I actually wrote Show Your Work. They were optimistic times, but I had a newborn, and my son was really young, and I was watching him part-time, and so I don't really remember much of the writing of Show Your Work. So that's a funny book for me to dip back into, because I'm like, oh yeah, this part, I forgot about this. This is pretty good.
Yeah.
And Keep Going, like I probably had the cushiest conditions, but existentially it was the most difficult book to read.
Hey, what is the meaning of this? Well, I want to say that this episode is also brought to you by my monthly newsletter. Oh yeah, that's right. On the first of the month, you can get a tasty bit of goodness sent right to your inbox. My reading recommendations for the month and what you might have missed from the world of the podcast. Visit BrendanO'Mara.com. Once a month, no spam, can't beat it. Now back to the show.
No.
Yeah, and the books, I'm always amazed when I dip back into them how easy they are to read, how simple they come across, how simple the ideas, and how so sort of coalesced the ideas are, and all the quotes. And but when I really boil it down, I'm like, there is a ton of work going on here to really squeeze out the most efficient use of every word and to thematically tie it into all the stuff that Austin is somehow curating from across the internet and the books he's reading. So what does that look like for you as you're pulling together all this information? How do you keep that straight so you can then access it in such a way that reads so fluidly?
It's probably more haphazard than you would expect.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have like a great, like my friend Ryan Holiday has this like really, he has this very, very disciplined, very thoughtful way of capturing stuff. What he does is he reads books and underlines just like I do, but then he goes through with index cards, like actual index cards, and like transcribes all the passages that popped out at him, and then he kind of indexes them and then he puts them in this big file. So he has this like gigantic commonplace book really of index cards in an actual box. And what I do is much more scattershot than that. Is it's kind of like when I read, I'm like underlining stuff, and then some of it I copy into a notebook or I put in my diary, but then a lot of it I'll like tweet out or put in a blog post or something like that. So a lot of what I do is kind of research in public. I'm kind of like sharing bits and pieces as I go. And then what's interesting about that is that people then send me more stuff to read as I'm going. So like I'll share a quote that I love out of a book that I know I might want to use later, but then someone sends me a book that's even more interesting than that. And so I'm kind of like researching out in the open, and even, portions of these books began as like tweets or blog posts, and then they get kind of interpolated into the book. And so I've tried to be more like disciplined and orderly about my research, but there's just something I try really hard not to fight what works for me. I
Right.
feel like that happens to us a lot in our creative careers. I feel like we kind of achieve these job titles. Like you feel like, well, I'm a real author now, so I should work like a capital author works,
Yeah.
But the thing that got me here is the way I naturally operate. And so I've tried to go just be like, sort of trust the process, as they say. Just know that like bits and pieces over time will turn into something bigger. And so if I had to describe the way I work now, it's basically like I carry this pocket notebook with me all the time. And then I scribble stuff in that. And then every morning I write in a diary, and that could be 3 to 5 to 6 to 7 pages or whatever. And then I make a blog post every morning. That over time kind of turns into talks, which then turn into books. Like Keep Going was a talk before it was actually a book. And there's something about working in that kind of like bits and pieces over time way, where it's like it starts out as like notes in a notebook or tweets, and then it's like diary entries or blog posts, and then it becomes like a talk, and then it becomes like a fleshed out book. That's like just sort of the way I work. And I think that I was talking to someone else this week, and they were like, I've always wondered if that would feel cheap for my audience, that they'd be like, oh, well, I've already read some of like these little bits and snippets, like I recognize these. But someone I was talking to this week said, oh, it's kind of thrilling to have seen you like go through these things in real time, and then for it to be like polished and fleshed out and like all in this coherent package. I think people are much more forgiving now. When I first started doing books, it felt like people didn't want to pay for something that was online. And now it feels like if something has been well designed and like curated and like put together coherently, like you'll gladly pay $10 to not have to sift through the internet. You know what I mean? It's almost like, you could probably find the nuggets of this on his blog, but who the hell wants to spend more time on the internet? You know what I mean? Like, so it's this interesting thing. But one of the things that really I was obsessed with while I was doing Keep Going was I wanted to find a repeatable system for making work. And that system I just described to you is sort of like me emulating Thoreau, or in someone more contemporary, David Sedaris. Because if you think about both those guys, and they seem like strange, like bedfellows or like strange to put together, but they both like walked a bunch, and they kept pocket notebooks, and they kept daily diaries, and then they turned those diaries into lectures or performances, and then they collected those pieces into books. So there was that kind of like that same sort of process going on. And I was just like really inspired by them when I did this book.
And I think what that gets at too, and this is definitely a learned skill, and I'd love to get your impressions on it, is cultivating a real sense of patience with your work. So like, how have you learned to do that in such fast times?
I have to say, like, I felt like I didn't have any until I had kids.
Mm-hmm.
And once I had children, I had to like dig deep into my patience bag. I mean, it's just so, but kids sort of rearrange your idea of time too, because you kind of watch this thing growing over time, and you just like get this whole new perspective. And I also think that I'm 35, so I'm not that old, but I do feel that kind of you're approaching middle age. I feel that like you're headed there. And I do think that, once you start heading there, your perspective on time, you're like, I haven't felt panicked like, oh, I don't have much time left, like I got to get to work. I've actually felt the opposite lately, where it's like, Well, life expectancy wise, I hope I live to 80. So I actually have a lot of time left. If we go by statistics, granted, the world could blow up or I could blow up or whatever. I might stick around for a while. How do I keep doing this then? Was my, you switch to like, how not like, I need to get things done now to how am I going to keep up this practice indefinitely? Because I really want to be an old working person. Like, I want to be a David Hockney, or a Bill Cunningham when he was alive, or a Joan Rivers. Like, I want to be one of these people that still does really great work into their 80s or 90s. Like, I really want to keep doing this indefinitely. So I just realized, like, I need a system. I need like a daily practice that will pull me through my days and through this whatever career I get and whatever lifespan I get. And like, it became clear to me that to have this kind of day by day approach was a sustainable way of working. I think when I was younger, I was more about those like quick bursts, like get things done. And now I'm like, how do I sustain my energy over time? Like, spoken like a true tired parent, just like, what is my endurance level? How do I sustain this?
Yeah, because I've heard you talk about with respect to productivity and hacking and how nauseating that is, and it sounds like you're, the ultimate hack, I hate that word, but it's just like kind of slowing down and being okay playing the long game with it, and like securing, as you write in the latest book, your bliss station, and that can be a physical or a temporal place.
Yes, the bliss station was one of my, I'm very skeptical actually of Joseph Campbell's "Follow Your Bliss." I think there's a great New Yorker cartoon that has a guy standing on the street and he's holding a cardboard sign and it says "Followed my bliss." And so I'm actually kind of skeptical of Campbell's like assertion that everyone should follow their bliss, because I think it gets like misinterpreted by people. But the one thing I unquestionably love is his idea of a bliss station. And that is like a place or a time in which you completely disconnect from the world to connect with yourself. And he said there has to be like a certain place or a certain time of day where nobody knows like where you are, or you don't know what your friends are up to, you don't know what the world is up to, you're just there to sort of experience and become, and to make things, and to kind of have those blissful moments. And that was really powerful to me. And I think that everyone needs to have these little bliss stations in their life, just a place that's just for you, where you kind of reconnect and disconnect enough from the world that you can connect with yourself, basically.
And there's another great moment in the book too, and this is a quote I had read from Mike Birbiglia when he was writing these New York Times columns, and you cited it perfectly in the book, that you don't necessarily, maybe you're not supposed to be an artist, and and he and he says, you might be meant to teach kids or raise money for a food bank. Don't rule out quitting. There's going to be an insane amount of work ahead, and your time might be better spent elsewhere. And, why do you think, embedded in that is like, why do you think so many people want to make their living as an artist, or feel like their art needs to somehow sustain themselves?
I don't know. I mean, Adam Phillips, the psychologist and the writer, he talks really beautifully about how sometimes art is more of a problem for people than a solution. Like, there are a lot of people who become artists who really should have done something else. Like, the art life kind of led them down into this dark place, And I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of myth built up around the artist. I think it gets, our notions of fame and celebrity kind of get mixed in there. And I think that people think that, I've been really interested in fame in the past couple of years. And there's a great guy named Shep Gordon, and there was a documentary about him that Mike Myers produced called Supermensch. And Shep Gordon's job was to make people famous as an agent. He was Alice Cooper's agent. But what's so beautiful about the documentary is that he talks about how toxic fame is and how fame doesn't really have any true value on its own. He says that, most people who get famous are trying to fill a hole somehow, and they've quickly realized that fame won't fill it, and it probably just rips it open bigger. And I think that's why, sort of rewriting a lot of the myths around artists and to start thinking of artists as people who do things, to kind of, repitch art as a verb and not a noun, and to get people to kind of forget about the noun, to forget about being an artist or forget about being a writer. Think about what you want to actually do, because you bump into all kinds of people like that, particularly in creative writing workshops.
Yeah.
You bump into people who they really, really want to be a writer, but they don't want to do any writing.
Right.
They don't want to actually write. And I think that happens a lot with kids too. I mean, even at a young age, what do adults often ask kids? They ask them what do you want to be when you grow up? People ask you that question from a very early age. And I'm just really interested in what is it that you like to do? What are your verbs? What are the things that really make you feel alive and make you feel like you're contributing something? Focus on them and forget about the nouns for a little bit, because I think when you focus on your verbs, when you focus on what you truly feel like you're good at and you love to do, that will take you further than chasing after some noun, or some job title. And that's something I've been thinking a lot about lately. It's just how do we refocus our lives on the verbs of living rather than the nouns?
And there's another moment too where, actually this is in Manjula Martin's great book Scratch, and and there's a moment in there where you said it's almost like be careful what you wish for, when your art becomes your breadwinning, and that it can drag you down. And I feel like this was probably in and around that time Show Your Work had come out, and maybe you were still reflecting on the time and how painful that book was to write. How do you pull yourself or resuscitate your creative energy out of that once you've been burned out by an art that's become your avocation?
Well, I think that play is so important for the artist. There really needs to be some time where you do not worry about the results of what you're doing. I think that when art becomes or writing or whatever the passion is becomes the job, there needs to be time that it's not work, that it's just play. And there needs to be time built in where you're just futzing around, you're just playing and you're doing things for no good reason at all. As a writer right now, for me, there's always something for me to do. I could be writing a blog post, or I could be answering an email, or I could be writing a speech, or, I could be doing all these things that demonstrably make me money. But there needs to be time in my day where I sit down and I'm not doing it for any other reason but to see what happens. And so for me right now, that's what my diary is. My diary is a place where I sit down and I practice what it is that I do, which is write, but I do it in a way where I'm not interested in the results. I don't really care about the results. I only want the process. And that is kind of the way I think to make sure you don't fall too far off the path. But I also think there's other techniques. I'm a big fan of kind of doing things for non-market reasons. Like professionalism sort of takes over, I think it's time to kind of get amateur again, And so one of the things I love to do is I love to make stuff for specific people, and that just happens to be right now the easiest people to do that for are my kids. So I love to like just make a piece of art for my son Owen. For a while we were trading. He was really into robots, so like I would make him a robot. I would collage a robot from magazines, and then he would draw me a robot, and we would just like kind of trade back and forth for a while. And there was something so pure and good about that exercise that it actually led me to other work, because I found this little like tape and magazine technique that worked well for these robots. Maybe I could use it for this other stuff. You know what I mean? So I also think that like once you turn your hobby into a profession, unfortunately, I think you have to find another hobby. For me, music is something I keep non-professional in my life, like playing music. And so when I sit down to the piano, the piano asks nothing of me other than my touch. It just doesn't, and my attention, and it gives back so much more. Owen and I, my oldest, we actually make music together, and we actually made a song for the book trailer. And I even started to worry, like, is this too professional?
Right.
Like, should we not be doing this? Should we not be using a piece of music that we made for fun for the book trailer? Yeah. But I thought it fit really well, and I wanted to do it. So, but I think the essential difference there is that we didn't make it specifically for the book trailer. It's just like a piece of music that we made that I thought would be really good for the book trailer. But we didn't make it to like, to have music for the trailer, and I think that's the difference. But I think of it too in terms of like, if you wanted to get kind of corporate with it, it would be like R&D, in a good company. Like you need like a lab of people who are just kind of like messing around and trying to come up with weird stuff that you can turn into products later,
Yeah.
So there needs to be some good R&D time, even if you're, to use Paul Jarvis's, he calls it a company of one. Even if you're a company of one, you still need that R&D time, and you need that time to not know what's going to happen. And I think that's really a big message that I've kind of figured out, is that like, there's so much out there right now as like, if you're a creative, you have to be a brand, like you have to be your own brand or whatever.
And you better be on brand.
Yes. And I find this very depressing, because you're asking a person to be a brand and to have like, to have to be on brand all the time. And the problem with that is, if you really want to develop or experiment or push yourself at all, like you have to be off brand every once in a while. And if you're constantly worried about being on brand, when do you do that really weird, interesting work that'll get you to the next place? I mean, I suppose that's a good case for doing things in private and not sharing. So yeah, these are all like really interesting questions. And I think what I'm getting more comfortable with is that they're unsolvable, that you don't actually ever solve these questions. You just grapple with them, and the grappling kind of provides the meaning for the work.
Over the course of your writing career, starting with Newspaper Blackout, and then of course, progressing through your 5 publishable, your five books essentially, how have you processed going from relative obscurity to someone who has, an audience and a pretty big audience, and people listen to you? Like, how have you processed that over the last like 8 years or 8 to 10 years or so?
Well, I think my first impulse is to quote the Rolling Stone writers when Rolling Stone first took off. I think they said to each other, "Oh no, people are watching now. Let's pretend they're not."
Yeah.
But I know, like, on a personal level that's you can't do that. That you can't deny your audience, and you could try to ignore it as much as you can, but like you're in a different place now, and so you might have to operate in a different way. I will say that like I am most interesting and most productive and most creative when I don't try to operate like anyone else, or I don't operate on shoulds. I don't. And what I mean by that is, again, like after Show Your Work came out and I was like an author with a capital A and like a speaker and stuff, I just felt like, for example, to give you a really concrete thing, I stopped posting to my blog every day. I only posted to my blog and my website when I had some kind of like good, like sort of like helpful essay, that I thought everyone would really like, and what it meant is that like I was always worried when I went to post something on my blog. I was like, is this good enough to share? Like, will people like this, or what, that kind of thing. And what happened about 2 years ago is I said, you know what, this is everything against what I've always recommended to people. This is operating in a way that is completely, it's not only sort of arbitrary, it's stifling. So I was like, why don't I go back to how I used to do it, which is like every day you just make a blog post. I was like, what would happen if I just started blogging again every day? And I just started doing that again. And the amazing thing happened that happens in this book called Art and Fear. They talk about this pottery class where the teacher gave the students, an assignment. And half of the class, their job was to try to come up with the best pot they could possibly make. And the other half of the class, their assignment was to simply make as many pots as they could. And at the end of the class, the teacher compared all the student work. And I think how it happened was that the students who were supposed to just make as many pots as they could, they actually came up with more and better pots than the people whose only job was to produce one like perfect pot. And, whether that's apocryphal or true or not, it certainly feels right to me, which is in the act of like simply trying to do a blog post every day, I strike gold more often now with the entries than I did when I just sat down to try to make like a great entry,
Right.
So there's something about that repetitive process of just coming back and trying and doing things over and over again that it just leads to more and better work. And that was like, but again, that's you're operating in a way where you're like, well, you're like a fancy author now. You're just going to give away a blog post every day. You know what I mean? But the more I kind of, to go back to that kind of punk rock spirit that you talked about in the books, the more I kind of operate in that original mode of what I wanted to do, which was just have a place to connect with the world I wanted to connect to. Like that was what my website was, is I kind of wanted to join in the fun, and kind of invent myself. The more it's about like using the web as a self-invention machine rather than a self-promotion machine. So the more I operate in a way that's natural to me, I think the better the work is. And it's just like, it's one of the things that really makes me crazy about life is, you have to discover the cliched wisdom for yourself through your own experiences. I hate how inefficient that is, but I think that's something that our culture is waking up to right now, is that life is not about efficiency.
Yeah.
It's about meaning.
Yeah. And but with your blogging every day or putting out a newsletter every week, you're going to strike gold more often. And what underscores that is that you have to be comfortable writing bad words to get the good words, right?
Absolutely. Like you're going to have an off week, you're going to have an off day. And you know what? It's great. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Like, you did a blog post that you didn't like, don't share it on Twitter or don't push it out anywhere. Just let it sit. And the people who read you through like RSS or something, they'll just be like, like no one really cares. Like that is something that my friend, I think that was Jessica Hagee who said that. Like, my friend Jessica was just like, the best thing that young artists should know is that no one cares. Like, and that should be liberating for you, that no one's watching that closely. No one cares. Like, just go for it.
Right.
And I still have to remind myself of that, even with an audience. I'm like, look, like every week it's funny because I put out the weekly newsletter, and every week there's some post I don't link to in the newsletter because I'm like, let's just let that post get pushed down over time. Who cares?
And with the newsletter is something I wanted to touch upon too, because I love it so much. It's one of the highlights of my week every Friday when you push that out. And yeah, and what was your original sort of vision for the newsletter, and what were you reading at the time that kind of informed what you would turn into your own thing that you have since put out every week for years now?
I have a friend named Hugh McLeod, and he wrote a great book called Ignore Everybody, which was an influence on Steal Like an Artist. And his alter ego online is Gaping Void. And Hugh, I want to say either half a decade ago or maybe even a decade ago, was one of the first people I saw really experimenting with the email newsletters. And at one point, Hugh told me that his newsletter was the size of South by Southwest, basically. He was like, okay, take all the people that go to South by Southwest, like that's my newsletter. And he did this brilliant thing where he put this newsletter out, and then at the top of every newsletter was a art print that people could buy. So he basically like had this incredible business just by putting this newsletter out. So I was interested as a greasy. It began as almost like a greasy marketing thing. Like, I was like, oh well, newsletters. That's interesting. But what happened over time is I kind of hit when I first started putting out a newsletter. I think it was right in between Steal Like an Artist and Show Your Work, and people weren't as blown out on social media as they are now. But the newsletter eventually, like at first it wasn't very good. It was kind of like haphazard, and it wasn't, it really hadn't, it was really when I hit on the list of 10 that all of a sudden it was like, it became much looser, and it freed me up to make the newsletter more like what my blog used to be. Like when I first started blogging, they weren't like well thought out blog posts. They were like, it was almost like a link blog or something. And so the newsletter freed me up to be more of myself for subscribers. So like I would link to my own stuff, and then I'd link to what I was reading, but then I'd drop in like, oh, I watched this movie and really liked it, or then I listened to this music this week that I really love. It let me be more of a whole well-rounded person. And I found that really liberating, and it felt like the more eclectic I was in the newsletter, like the more people liked it, which just always surprises me, So I think that is an interesting thing for me. I've noticed over time that sometimes I start something and it doesn't have the best intentions. Like it starts out as like a marketing device, like, oh, well, I'll get everybody's email and I'll send out something for free every week, and then I'll sell them a book whenever it's
Right.
But it actually, like, I think if you have a creative spirit and you spend that much time on something every week, you trick yourself into it becoming actually this thing that you love, that you really look forward to. Like if someone put a gun to my head and they were like, you can only keep one of your online things, like which one would it be? I would absolutely say my weekly newsletter, because it's the most fun I have. And I look forward to Thursdays now, because Thursday afternoons when I put the newsletter together, And I love it because it's so clear what I need to do. I need to put out a good newsletter, and it helps me kind of check in with my life every week. I get to like look back through my journal and like my date book and look back through my Twitter and stuff and like, what were you into this week? Like what spoke to you? And I notice patterns and stuff like that, so it's like this really, you start something thinking it's just going to get you, grab eyeballs or whatever. And that becomes this very like this thing that's really near and dear to you, and, I love that. I love being surprised by that process. That's how it got started.
Oh, that's great. And
20 minutes later, sorry.
No, that's amazing. It informs the one I put out, a monthly one, and it's similar in form to yours. I from a place of generosity and value to people for offering their time and their attention, which is like the ultimate currency these days. So it's like you want to like make sure that they're getting something for it.
Yeah, I mean that's just old writerly wisdom, right? Like you want to be a good date. Like you
Right.
just want to be a good date. And I'm not going to rag on anyone in particular, but like I pick up these books and it's just I'll pick up a book like Susan Orlean's The Library Book, and she just like rips out of the gate. And it's like it's long and it's great. And you're just like, wow. And then like some of the business books you pick up, you're just like, there's like some 10-page introduction. And you're just like, are you trying to bore me to death? You know what I mean? Like, it's just so, it feels sometimes like that's, the reader, books are about serving the reader, like, when people pick up my books or click open the newsletter even, it's like, yes, I have these things that I want to say and I have things to give you, but like I want this to be fun and I want you not to be bored. Like if you're bored, I failed. Don't be boring.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately what your work does so well, is that it's playful and fun, and just by reading a couple pages, it almost gives you that runner's high if you're a runner, and it does give you that extra energy, a little nudge to say like, yeah, go out there and make something bad, make something shitty, and then just play with it, have fun. Don't be so earnest. This is fun. We get to do this.
Yeah, this should be fun, and that really. And I feel that very deeply about books. I don't think books should be a slog, even at its most whaley, like Moby Dick is awesome. I don't find it to be that much of a slog if you can really get into it. But like, even if you don't, then go find some other book that was written for you. Like life is just too short to not be jazzed by what you're reading. The whole point of books is they're supposed to activate what's inside us and help us grow and become who we're going to be. I think a lot of times, like I don't think books actually tell you something that you don't know. Sometimes I think a lot of the books that are the closest to us are books that articulate something that was already inside us that we just hadn't found the words for. And I hear that a lot. And that's the best compliment that I get from a lot of people. They say, you said what I'd been thinking. I just couldn't come up with the words for it, because those are the books that really mean something to people.
Well, and where can people find you online if they're not already familiar with your work, Austin?
It's super easy. Just go to austinkleon.com. And there's more of me there than you even need.
How amazing was that? Rhetorical question. But it was amazing, wasn't it? I've been a big fan of his for years. Like, he's got it going on. And to get to talk to him was a total thrill. So go check him out on his book tour. His talks are amazing. His books are amazing. Buy one for yourself and a friend or a couple friends. It's very worth it, man. Thanks to Austin, of course, and thanks to Goucher's MFA in Nonfiction and Bay Path University's MFA in Creative Nonfiction for making the show possible. Keep the conversation going on Twitter. I'm at Brendan O'Meara and at CNFpod there. On Instagram, at Brendan O'Meara and at CNFpod. Getting real creative here. Facebook's the Creative Nonfiction Podcast. You can find it anywhere. Let's connect. I'd love to do a CNF and mailbag. Send an email to creativenonfictionpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll read some of that on the air. I think this would be kind of fun. I want to pull you CNFers into the fray. You're on the sidelines, man. Jump in the fire. Is that it? Oh, yes, and share with a friend. You, as you know, you are the social network. Rage against the algorithm. Email to your network or share on social. Tag me in the show so I can give you a digital fist bump or the devil horns. Is that it? Now it's it. Now it is definitely it. So remember, man, if you can't do, interview. See ya.